Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Patrick with Stacking Layers. Today I'm going to be doing a review, I suppose, on the new BIQU. You can see there is the BIQU Hurakan 3D printer. Um, if I actually went through with it, you probably would have seen I already released an unboxing and a terribly long video. If not, then you have no clue what I'm talking about. But I did do an unboxing video and it's really sloppy, so I'm still contemplating if I'm going to put it out or not. But if you saw it, there you go, you saw it. Anyways, so this is going to be my reviews. Now that I've been using it for a few days, playing around with Klipper and all that good stuff and seeing what this printer can do, I feel like now I can talk a little bit about it. So I'm going to give my, pretty much, I guess I'm gonna say it's gonna be like an amateur style, first time use type of a review because I'm not a pro printer. I'm doing this as a hobby, as you could probably tell by my other videos. It's just when I find out things, I like to dive deep into them and really try to explore what they can do and what they're all about. So, um, kind of what I've done with this. Now, if you don't know what the Hurakan is, this is the first time seeing that on my channel. This is BIQU's new 3D printer. It is a Cartesian bed slinger style printer, as you can see. Eyeballs not included. I did that as a joke. There were some Twitter guys that I was talking with, so that's why the eyeballs are there. But that is one thing I can start off with. Well, let me continue. So what BIQU has done is they made this printer actually kind of in partnership with Klipper firmware, and this is the first, as far as I'm aware of, this is the first 3D printer from a factory that comes pre-installed with Klipper, ready to go out of the box. Everything's done. There's nothing you need to do. You don't need a flash firmware or anything like that, which is pretty cool. And I think that's really the big selling point on this, besides a couple other things I'm going to point out here. But having Klipper out of the box is really nice because Klipper is really starting to gain a lot of traction in firmware interest, I guess it would be. Marlin is really the base firmware that most companies use because it's put on the main board and that's it. There's no extra hardware required or anything like that. Whereas with Klipper, if you're not familiar, Klipper requires some sort of secondary computer system, like which most people use as a Raspberry Pi, in order to run actually the hardware on, and then the hardware or the firmware, sorry, to run the firmware on. But the firmware that's on the main board or the controller board is more or less just kind of a firmware to translate what Klipper on the Raspberry Pi is telling the main board to do. So it's more of just an interface firmware, so it knows how to continue on with reading it, or sending the G-code information through to the motors and whatnot. So what they've done here is really neat because inside the machine here is both the controller board and a Raspberry Pi type thing. Now this one doesn't have a Raspberry Pi built in. This has BIQU's Raspberry Pi alternative, or actually what it is a CM4 alternative called the CB1, and that is if you know what the CM4 is, it's like a Raspberry Pi without all the output, so it doesn't have USBs or anything like that. It's just the main guts of what a Raspberry Pi is, the CPU and the power modules and all that different stuff, and then you click it onto the various types of boards, which in case with this one, maybe I'll figure out how to put a picture up, but if I don't, what it is this is a main board with a slot where that CB1, or believe it or not, a CM4, CB1, which is BIQU's version of it, and the CM4 can both click onto. So you can actually change and put a real Raspberry Pi CM4 on this board if you wanted to in the future. If you have more Raspberry Pi experience. Now with a CB1, it's running Debian Linux on it. Debian 11, I believe is what it is, and then it has Klipper and main cell as their UI, if you're familiar with those things. Basically, that's how you interact with it through the internet, which is another cool thing about this printer. It is full-blown Wi-Fi ready. All you got to do is take out this little card, put in your Wi-Fi password and router name, click it back in, turn it on, and away you go. You're set. You don't have to use it for Wi-Fi. It's not required. You do have a little screen for minor control. You can take the card out, put your STL or your G-code file for making something onto here in a G-code file thing, and then it'll pop up on the screen here. So you don't have to use Wi-Fi, but it's highly recommended because that's really what gives Klipper its big-time power. It's where you have this full-blown user interface and you can modify the firmware and do all sorts of stuff through the web interface and never have to reflash firmware. You can just update parameters, and if you want the thing to have a higher acceleration or change things around, add extra motors, all sorts of stuff, you name it. You can even customize the menus that are on the screen here, and you don't have to reflash. You literally just save, reboot, and you're done, and it's now the newer firmware basically. So that's what's really cool about this printer, is that it's running Klipper right out of the box. Now, when it comes to Klipper, a lot of people seem to think, or pretty much one of its strong points are also the fact, besides being able to do all your firmware and stuff without having to reflash, is that Klipper seems to be able to handle higher speeds quite a bit better than Marlin. They'll both do it. It's all about tuning, but Klipper does have some extra features built in that seem to really help speed things up. One of them being input shaper, and I have run that on here. Now, input shaper, as you can see, these are the two tests. So let's see. Here's the first one. Now, as you can see, when you have high acceleration, this was at the very top here, about 7,000 millimeters per second squared for acceleration. So really fast acceleration, especially for a bed slinger. These things actually aren't really designed to go fast, although they can. But this was 80 millimeter per second print speed. At the top, when you start seeing those, the wavy lines going, that's the ringing. It's an oscillation that's happening from the speed. That's up at 7,000 millimeter per second square acceleration. So it starts really producing these nasty rings. But that's what you have to do if you want the print to print really fast, and this does. But in order to compensate for that, Klipper has this thing called input shaper, and it actually compensates for those ringing. Now, I still haven't done it. I think I dialed it in better after this. I did change it one more time before, and I just didn't print a new one. But as you can see the difference, it's a lot smoother. As a matter of fact, on this side, it's pretty much gone. You can see a little bit there if I get the reflection right. Whereas here's the same side. As you can see, it's a big difference. I'll try to put them side by side here. There you go. So you see the ringing obviously still there because I didn't tune it in. My digital calipers are dead have a dead battery right now, so I'm using manual ones, so it's not 100% precise, but to get the measurements and stuff. So basically what you do is you print these models, you measure out the ringing and do some math, and then you put in the number in there, and it fixes things up. Now what's really cool about this, the only reason I did it this manually is because I don't have the 80XL accelerometer sensor. Now this has built-in port in the back. It's called an SPI port, and you can actually attach a sensor to here and then to the bed and actually do all of this ring testing or all this stuff automatically. So that makes it really cool. And again, it's built in. It's already set up, ready to go. I just don't have one. It isn't a separately sold accessory, so I don't have it with me. But I do have one, a smaller version that I bought from AliExpress a long time ago. I just haven't wired it up yet, so I'll do that, and maybe I'll make another video and showing the difference there. But that was one of the things I wanted to point out. So the reason why I'm talking about the speed on these things is because, as you can see right now, it seems to be printing pretty much normal. And that is where I start coming into giving the review on this printer. Now, with the speed stuff of Klipper, that is very true. They can go faster. I've had this so far up to 100 millimeters per second print speed. Actually, wall speed, not just print speed, where it was truly making that speed. And it does start, showing its true colors when it starts doing that. Anything above that, I'm not going to say it's worth it. If you're looking for printing extremely fast, you're going to want to build a true Core XY style printer. That's where the X and the Y are on one system and the bed doesn't move. Because what's going on is with speed, your heaviest component is your limiting factor. And because it's still a bed slinger, this big bed is still a lot of mass to move around. Once you start moving too much mass around, you start getting problems with motor skipping, ringing happening, which is why I was showing you those tests. You get this oscillation through the printer system, and unfortunately, that's just what happens. You get these ringing, so your print doesn't come out very nice. So I found a really nice sweet spot is anywhere from 60 to 80. Anything below that, you're going to get beautiful prints. I think this one right now is running approximately 60. This is doing vase mode, but as you can see, it's a pretty intricate style vase, and it's so far so good. I don't know if we can really zoom in. As you can see, it's really smooth, really clean lines, and things just chugging along no problem. So definitely can handle 60 normal speeds. 80 did perfectly well. Now Here's some other prints I did earlier with before I did any tuning. It's a standard calibration dragon. I don't know if you've seen this. So this printed out very good until I got to the horns. Now this filament is a little bit weird that I was using. It's very old, so it was a little bit wet. So I will definitely point that out, but I'm not going to say it as an excuse of the way it looks. But the horns here, because I had to print a little bit higher temperature, the cooling at that speed, I forget what speed I was printing. I think this was at 80. Could have been, yeah, I think this was at 80 millimeters per second that I was printing this at, just to test to see how fast I can get it going. So with that, having to bump up the heat to compensate and all that, the cooling shows that obviously that's what these bad areas in the background are, because it was too hot and not cooling down fast enough, so it starts curling upward. So that's what caused those messing there. So probably one thing I would like to change is the direction, because these fans, it's got a dual fan, they're nice, they're pumping out a decent amount of air, but the guides are very wide. So as you can see, probably there you go, that's a decent view of that. So the fan are completely, here from a side view, see how it's the complete width of the fan. So it's a little wide. I think I might want to redesign something so it's more of a direct at the nozzle only. So maybe get a little bit more pressure on there. We'll experiment with that later. Did an alien at a very small scale. I think this thing was at a 30 or 40 scale. Printed beautifully. Didn't have any issues with that. Ran out of filament, had to switch so you could see the different color in his head. But you know, you got the standard lines, and there's that again, because this filament needed to be printed hotter, so the really thin areas weren't able to cool down fast enough, so it was getting that weird upward kind of yeah, where it curls itself upward. If you ever see the sharp areas of your print starting to do this, things like on the benchy, I'll show you that on there at the tip here. You see how that little dips in? Now I was printing too hot, so I lowered the temperature, and then as you can see, it went away. It started getting fine. So if you ever see the tips, really thin areas, or tips starting to curl upward as you're printing, or you're getting these really strange things like that, see even on the backs of his arms, where you're getting the really rough, thin areas, that's because it's printing too hot, or I should say, because it's a combination of the two also. It could be printing too fast, too hot, and not enough cooling. The main reason what's going on is that this layer is not able to cool down before the next layer comes around, and so it starts slowly, you know, skewing or smearing each layer, and over time it starts to do kind of curl upward like that, and each time it passes it gets more and more curled and messes up that layer or that zone. So that's what that is if you ever see that. So that has happened with this one, but I'm not saying it's definitely a fault of the printer. It's because I was printing hot and fast, just really pushing the limits, and that kind of brings back to the benchy here. This one was printed at 95. I think after I did a couple percentage, it was about almost 100 millimeters per second, just under 100 millimeters per second. So it completed fairly well, considering that it was pumping out 100 millimeters per second. Now, of course, once it gets up to the top in these thin areas, it never does reach that because acceleration is still, I think I bumped it to 3,500 millimeters per second square. So once you get to these small thin areas, even though you have your printer saying 100 millimeters per second, it's not going to reach that because acceleration is not there. So on the hull, once it gets to these long sweeps, it was hitting it. I saw it in the Klipper interface that it was hitting that very often. And then once it got up into here, it would go to like 30 and then up, almost hit 90 and then go back down. So it was doing okay, but it definitely could have been better, of course, as you can see. Stringing, believe it or not, I was using this as a sample. I tried to bump up or try pressure advance, which is another nice thing that Klipper has built in. Kind of like linear advance with Marlin. And what it does is it kind of pushes on the filament a little bit harder to compensate for like oozing and things like that. So it'll push and pull on the filament a little bit differently than standard, trying to make it to where you don't get oozing and dripping, which would help with stringing. Now, because of that, typically they recommend you don't need much retraction in your firmware, or sorry, in your slicer settings. So believe it or not, with this Bowden tube, this was printed with a 1 millimeter retract at only 30 millimeters per second. So it's a very tiny retract for a Bowden tube, and that's the only amount of stringing. I wanted to point out, it is stringing, of course, but for a Bowden tube, you normally have something more like 4 to even 7 millimeters of retraction to compensate for how much flex is happening inside the Bowden tube. So considering that, that's the only string I got with a 1mm retract. That was pretty impressive to see. That I was really impressed. And that's with pressure advance going on, and you know, as you can see, there's lots of mistakes inside through here. There's also, it's not a very sharp edge, and those are classic from problems with pressure advance. As you start getting over smoothing, I had this set to like 0.7 or something like that. I forget the exact number, but it was set kind of a little bit too high. Actually, I have it turned off now because I've never been a fan of pressure advance. I don't know why. Probably because of that smoothing. But as you can see, relatively, the thing turned out fine. Even the first layer is beautiful, perfectly sharp, everything's great. Definitely not the best of benchies, but like I said, pushing at nearly 100 millimeters per second with an extremely high pressure advance setting on there, which I probably shouldn't have used, and a 1mm retract. I was actually impressed that it turned out as good as it did. I was expecting a much more ugly benchy than this, so pretty satisfied with that. And then for base mode, you know, when it comes to printers, especially these with bed slingers, base mode is always going to turn out beautiful. So as you can see, there's another cauldron thing that I did. I'm going to try to put the models in the description, so I credit the designers there. But I'm doing just a couple little base mode things to try out with that stuff. So as you can see, they turn out beautiful. I don't know if you noticed, but this one has kind of a slight color change where it's a little bit shinier and darker at the bottom and gets lighter. And what I did was with this print also, I was experimenting with starting at about 40 or 50, I was 50 millimeters per second print here, and then I decided to bump up the speed to see how fast I can get. I did I think it was like, I bumped it to 200%, so that was getting up into the 80 plus range. But something I noticed was the temperature. I did have to bump that up too, but I didn't want to bump it past what the recommended high value was for this filament. So because of that, what happened was it was obvious that the temperature was not able to keep up. So again, that's another kind of thing that'll hold you back with speed printing, is the ability to have, you know, high flow, high temperature nozzles. Now this is a very relatively stock style system, so it's not designed for extreme high flow and high temperatures. Now of course it's upgradable, so if you want to, that can be done in the future. So pretty standard setup when it comes to printers, where, you know, you're not going to have a bed slinger to do speed printing. Yes, it can go fast. It can go no problem 80 millimeters per second wall speed. It prints fine. That's, like I said, what these were printed at, so they turned out perfect, you know, when it comes to what they do. You can see they're nice and shiny. There's no adhesion issues. There's no splitting or anything like that. So they come out quality. The extruder seemed to handle it. Now when I was bumping up the cauldron thing to the high speeds, because I had it set to this was at a 0.28 layer height, so fairly thick layer height, and a 0.6 millimeter thickness of lines, just to give it a little bit more substance. I noticed at times if I didn't bump up the heat, then the extruder would click, but that's, you know, or skip steps, but that's how it works. If you're trying to push too hard and the filament and the temperature can't handle it, that's what's going to happen. So again, not really a fault of the printer. It's all about knowing how to adjust things. So I guess those would be the bads that I could point out. Other than that, I mean, the fans, all fans right now are full speed. So yeah, you can hear the fans, but it's not extremely loud. I don't know if you're able to, but I can hear the motor going while that, and it's, you know, they're silent steppers, so it's not really making much sound for the motors. The fan is still gonna be the loudest, but relatively good. Things I really do like about this printer is it has belt tension adjustment on both the X and the Y. Very nice. The design I also like. It's, you know, it's not just exposed channels and everything. It's a really clean look. It looks good, which, you know, is unnecessary, but also very nice to have. We all like to customize our things, of course, but this is kind of already set up in a nice custom style. Got a great blue accent going throughout the system. The hot end is relatively good. Like I said, I would probably want to get more beefy fans, get something a little more powerful and a better direction, you know, a little bit more tight flow for the air. Although printing at normal speeds seems to be doing perfect. What was I going to say? Oh, the bed. This is a cool feature. As you see, it's got two lights back there blinking, and there's an off-on switch. This bed is a dual heating style, so you can heat just the inside center where you see this smaller square, and then you can heat the whole bed. So you have like a 100 watt and a 220 watt system, basically two different types of heat zones. When both of them are on, the whole thing's heating. I always have all my bed heat up, so I haven't used too much of the smaller heating zone because in my mind it's still going to be drawing the heat out because it is an aluminum bed. But it's supposed to save power, so it will. You know, if it's only heating the smaller area, then the radiated heat. My idea is that it's just going to have to keep heating again and again because more heat will be radiated out, and so I just heat the whole thing. It's no big deal. So that's a cool feature. It does have the spring still. It's printed on both sides, which is nice, so you can flip it over if you ever scratch your bed up from miscalculating your Z height and stuff. You know, filaments up on top, but of course you don't have to have it there. That's always something you can easily move. But in all, oh, one other thing. If you haven't seen my tweets or anything, check out this. Let's see if I can get close and focus on there. This little guy right here. That's my finger. Look at how big that little black thing from the top part all the way there. That is like a BL Touch. This is the probe for the Z sensor. Or sorry, Z probe. So let me try to zoom in on that. I don't know if it's gonna, yeah. There you go. That tiny little thing in there is an equivalent to a BL Touch. I mean, this is probably one of the coolest things, I think, one of the new features. And this is going to be sold separately, too, from what I found out. But, I mean, look at that's my thumb. It's tiny. It's like a third or maybe half the size of a BL Touch. I think one of the guys that does testing said that when the probe is extended, it's 1/3 the size of a BL Touch with both probes extended. So it's a very small footprint, which also means it's all very light. I think it's supposed to be like only 6 ounces or something like that. So it's really light, really tiny. That's gonna be a cool thing. I want to get one for one of my other printers as soon as they become available. So that was a nice feature, and it's really powerful. Like when it clicks out, it's solid. It's a clunk. It's got a metal tip in it, and it seems to be very accurate. So far, its accuracy has been down in like 0.003 or something like that, or 0.03. I can't remember, but very, very accurate and consistent. That was another thing. It did, you know, the 20 probes to do consistency, and there was very little variance between probing. So they're very precise so far. Been really pleased with that. Seems to do very well. Really not much more I could say about this. You know, design-wise, these aren't infills. These are, as you can see, it's all covered. It's metal. It's part of the actual aluminum channels. So it's on 3 sides where you have the grooves, not on the front side, basically. So that's a really nice touch. It keeps things clean, and you don't have to worry about your filament falling down or having to design any type of covers to cover that stuff up. So that's a really nice touch. You know, it's basic screen. It's not a touch screen, so it's just a clicky. But this is Klipper again. So with Klipper, you primarily use the user interface through a website. So you can use it on your cell phone or on a computer or any, you know, tablet. Have a tablet sitting next to your system, and that's your actual screen instead of using this. There are options that you can replace and plug in a touchscreen system if you wanted to. You can do an HDMI screen and get Klipper screen on there, so it's a full touch interface right there. So there's different options for that. They do have already provisions, which is nice. There's a hole back here, and can't really see, but there's holes in the back here, so it's designed to have another Z axis added, which is going to be a kit. So basically it'll be, you know, just another Z motor with a screw, and then probably a different bracket here to screw into where the wheels are, like they've done with the other ones. So there's some upgrades available coming out soon that I saw on their website. Cameras, you can put an H2, other types of print heads, you know, still very customizable, just like any of these other types of printers. It's not locked to what it is. It's just the main difference is the fact that it's running Klipper right out of the box, and I think that's cool. Is this going to be a speed machine that everybody talks about with Klipper? And I'm going to say no. It can go quick, but it's not. You know, you're going to be limited. I don't think any bed slinger of this size is going to be going faster than 120 millimeters per second, especially if you want quality prints. It's just not going to happen. They're not made for that. Too much mass is what's happening here. It's just way too much mass to move around. Can they do it? Definitely. Is it necessary, or should you be trying to do that? I don't think so, personally. I think you should be keeping it at, you know, as a sweet spot around 60, maybe 80 millimeters per second. I even go a lot slower if I want a really high quality print for very small detail, because the slower you go with the right tuning, you'll get much better quality than if you try to zip through and be finished with something. It's just not worth it, in my opinion. Is it cool? Definitely cool to go fast, but it's not going to give you the quality that you're looking for, especially on a this type of a printer. If you need speed, go to the big Core XY systems. Get them to where there's, some even go as far as bolting them to the wall and stuff to really hold them in place so they can't shake around. And that's when you're getting these, several thousand millimeters per second type things going on. But really cool to see, but not necessary. So that's really anybody looking to buy something like this because they want a really fast printer. That's not what this is designed for. This is primarily, in my opinion at least, designed for getting people into Klipper without having to go through all of the installation and stuff like that, because it's done right out of the box. You're ready to go. So that's what it is. That's the BIQU Hurakan. That's my review. Do I recommend it? I want to say definitely, especially if you've been considering Klipper but you really don't want to go through all that firmware stuff. But besides that, technically you could, this is the MCU side, so you can just flash Marlin if you decide you hate Klipper and it's not working for you. You can flash Marlin onto the same board, and you have a slot already for a Raspberry Pi style setup, which is already installed also. That's what this is attached to. And if you want, I don't see why you couldn't just flash Marlin and put Octoprint on there. That's not what this is made for, but it should work no problem also. So if you find out that you completely just hate it and you want to go to Marlin, you can easily, if you know how to do your own firmware, stuff like that, you can easily flash new firmware to this and make it a Marlin printer if you wanted to. So there's always that. So worst case scenario, you go back to Marlin and you're still happy. You still got a great printer. Solid, build quality wise and all that. This thing is solid. It runs good. All the motors work great. It's got TMC 2209 steppers in it, stepper drivers, so it's designed to handle all the extra motion and stuff like that. They can handle good amperage, good torque. Otherwise, everything else is pretty straightforward and really good quality. I'm impressed. I really do recommend this one. So yeah, if you're looking for another printer and you want to get something that's kind of cool and new, the BIQU Hurakan is the way to go, I think. Anyways, let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Is this something that you would be interested in getting? Or if you want to see something done with this machine, I can do tests if you guys are interested in seeing it. I don't mind. I do need to get it out of the kitchen because I don't want to make my wife any more mad about this being here, because this is not this place for it. But I'll be getting into the dirty shop and then seeing where we can go from there. But anyways, let me know what you guys think. If you have any questions, like I said, let me know, and I will see what I can do. Until next time, thanks for watching. Happy printing.